We're no longer a science-based society. We are now a belief-based society.
Welcome to the show that the fact checkers warned you about. The one that debunks the mainstream narrative and gives you high signal, actionable content that helps you navigate the cloud world. It's Bomb Thrower TV with your host, Mark Jeftovic.
I'm going to do a very quick intro. My name is Mark Jeftovic. This is Bomb Thrower TV, and I am thrilled to welcome to the show today BJ Dichter, the one of the founding three of the Freedom Convoy, the movement that I think changed the world, actually. And we'll get into that today, but it really was something to behold. And I have your book, Honking For Freedom, the trucker convoy that gave us hope. And that's exactly what it did right there. And, what it was about, what it became, how it was framed. I mean, all of that fascinates me. I got involved very tangentially.
Okay.
And we'll get into that. But why don't we start with your background for those who haven't heard it? I know that being a trucker, I think it's part of your retirement plans, so to speak, in a way. And what were you doing before, and how did you become a trucker?
I describe it as a side hustle.
Yeah.
More of something to do, especially during the COVID years where we were locked in a virtual prison in Canada. My background, I've done a bunch of things. I started, I went to school for gemology and diamond grading. I specialized in diamond grading. I've worked in a number of varied careers. I invented a product for motorcycles many years ago and patented it in the United States. Ended up working for Harley Davidson. Worked as a project manager for a large chain. That's where I really learned how to manage large staffs of people, which normally would have been a huge asset at the Freedom Convoy. And I guess in some ways was, in some ways wasn't. I got into trucking after I sold my business several years ago. I had a business on Ryerson University campus in Toronto. I saw the shift in culture towards what I describe as extreme postmodernism or neo-progressivism, I like to call it. Saw it before my very eyes. And that's what really convinced me to get away from that business. And I started out of curiosity. I always wanted to do a podcast. I have a background in music, played with sequencers when they were first invented in the 80s. I've had a computer since I was 3 years old, started with a PET emulator. So I'm kind of a techie guy in that respect. So I started doing podcasts. And before COVID started, my brother, or my biological brother, came to me and said, let's buy trucks. And I looked at him and I said, what, are you crazy? What would I buy a truck for? And he knew I used to race my car at the track. I'm into motorcycles. Like, he knows I'm a car guy. And he said, no, I used to drive a truck when I was younger. And I always wanted to get a truck and maybe set up a trucking business for when I retire from policing. And he said, why don't you get your license? Because the regulations are changing. It's cheap now. It doesn't take a lot to get it. And maybe we'll do something when I retire, maybe not, but, just something to do. And I said, sure. And I love road trips. I love driving long distance. So it just became my, on the days that I wasn't doing podcasts or other things, if I had a free few days, I'd reach out to dispatch and I'd hop in the truck and I'd go to the US, often with my brother in tandem, but not always, to have some personal time and to get away from the craziness in Canada.
And your brother's a cop, or was?
Yeah, the story is this. I was at my my business on campus maybe 10 years ago. And I got a call from the police looking for me. And they said, stay where you are. We're going to come see you in about an hour or so. Cop comes in, plain clothes, dressed like you and I right now. And I remember, it's imprinted in my mind. I can see him talking to one of my employees, Phil, right in front of the door, pulls out his, like Law and Order, pulls out his ID, and they're pointing to me in the back. And like, uh-oh, what'd I do? I didn't do anything wrong. And he sits me down and he says, are you Benjamin Dichter? And I said, yes. He says, sit down. And he says, I might as well just tell you. He said, first, I'll tell you nobody's injured, or killed. I said, okay, great. Maybe I'm just very positive. That was the farthest thing from my mind. And he says, yeah, I've done a lot of that in my career. But I might as well just tell you, I'm your brother. Do you know you're adopted?
Wow.
And that's how, that's why I said biological brother. And it turns out he, at that time, was a detective. And now he's a sergeant getting close to retirement age.
Okay, a little bit of a tangent because this subject is our daughter is adopted. So I have to know.
Oh,
yeah, I'm curious. Did you know you were adopted before that moment?
oh yeah. From the age that I could speak and understand, I remember one of those early memories. I remember my parents calling me into their bedroom. So I remember the red carpet on the floor. And they said, mommy and daddy need to tell you something. Do you know what adopted is? And I'm like, no. And they explained what it is. And I was okay. So you're adopted. And my response was something to the effect of, okay, can I go play now? And that was it. Right.
Yeah. We told our daughter when she was, I think, like 5 years old. And, I remember the moment well. And she said something, she asked a question. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head right now. Probably just because of the hecticness of the interview, but it was like, but we explained it to her and she knew it. And there was a cartoon on TV in those days called Dinosaur Train that was, without ever saying it, was like this one dinosaur was not like the other dinosaurs, but it kind of found its way into their nest. And when he hatched, they just took him in. And treated him as one of the family. And it was like, it's kind of like Dinosaur Train. So yeah. Anyway.
If I can put your mind at ease, or the ease of anybody who's adopted children, something that I learned, we were our first conversation, we really kind of connected. And he explains to me, by the way, it's not just the two of us. We're full brothers and sisters, and we have two full sisters.
Oh, wow.
And we were all given away to different cultures, different backgrounds, whatever. And he gave me the whole extended thing, which is not important here. But he was telling me, we got to talking, he was telling me about a case that he was investigating. I think he was in homicide at the time. And, obviously not divulging too much information, but just general stuff that he's seen recently. And my automatic nonverbal reaction to him was, oy vey. And then he does this. And I looked at him like, what's the problem? He says, what did you just say? And he's a detective. He's Mr. Attention to Detail. Yeah. And I said, I don't know what I said. I said, oy vey. And he was, what is that? I said, wait, you've never seen The Daily Show? You've never seen Jackie Mason? Like it's Yiddish. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because of course, he grew up first in a Mennonite family, and then his parents passed away. It was a long story. But, and then I realized, despite the fact that we are genetically identical, we look very similar, we have some sort of similar traits, but he has none of the cultural experiences that I have in my life. And that really reaffirmed to me that my parents who adopted me are my parents, because I have all their behaviors. I have a combination of their worldviews and understandings and ethics and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll leave it after this one, but I've always said our daughter single-handedly settles the nature versus nurture argument, because she is an amalgamation of my wife and I to the T, much to our consternation sometimes. But
that's right. Okay,
she's iron-willed and will not budge on certain things. But anyway, let's talk. One thing I that was always frustrating to me when talking about the Freedom Convoy, and we'll get into the whole narrative and spin and media, but let's state it for the record here. What was the goal of the Freedom Convoy?
Oh, it was pretty simple: to end the vaccine mandates and to end the ArriveCAN app. And obviously, whenever you get a large group of people together, there's going to be various, sub grievances and whatever. But that was the primary goal of it. And it's not that people were, and this is despite what the mainstream media wanted to smear us and label with, it's not that people were necessarily anti-vax, although there were a lot of people who participated who felt that way. But it was pro-choice, right? It was, if you want to give me whatever, especially the fact that it was new technology, experimental, that always scares people. Bitcoin scares people. So imagine putting something in your veins, right?
Yeah.
So I think we tried to focus on what we all agreed on, the largest common denominator. And for me, as a techie guy, I might have been least skeptical about the mRNA than most people, but I was not completely sold, and I was not completely against. I was very much of inconclusive. I don't know, which is a space that we often forget in our society now, right? I didn't have enough data to form an opinion, but what I did know was government tracking, which I discussed in Tucker Carlson, was when I pulled up to the booth and the border agent said, "I don't need to see your phone. We already detected your phone because of the app, and I have all your information here." That for me was a concern because, well, is this going to end up in police cruisers and government offices all over the country? Like that's what really hit home for me most. Yeah, the mandates were a problem already. It was the government response to COVID in general, but the data collection part really aggravated it for me.
Yeah, and I think when I think it was on Robert Breedlove's podcast when I heard your story about you were pulling up to the booth, and like you said, the phone was broadcasting everything. So there was actually the ArriveCan app was done differently than the exposure app, because the exposure app, I actually had that on my phone, and I was putting out a tech newsletter at the time, and we still put it out actually at Easy DNS, my main business. And we said, we feel okay putting this app on your phone because the source code is on GitHub, right? We know what it does. It's up there. We can have thousands of eyes on it. There's nothing nefarious in here. This is how you do this kind of an intervention during a pandemic to sort of get that public confidence and to allay privacy fears. Is you publish the source code, you put it up on GitHub. As far as I know, that wasn't the case in ArriveCan. We had no idea what was in that app.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so we'll get to Bitcoin in a sec, but it was very quickly when the framing, well, not very quickly, but at some point, and you go through it in your book, you don't have to wade into the gory details of the Pat Kings and the Canada Unity. But at some point, there was the narrative just turned into something else, or it was always served up to the public as something else, that these are white supremacists, these people are looking to overthrow the government of Canada. I mean, I still talk to people to this day, and that is their mental model for the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, because they're suffering from narrative poisoning, and depending on what media they're subjected to, that's really the opinion that they ended up holding, because they've heard one opinion repeated to them over and over and over again, which is my concern with media, that everybody's using the Goebbels tactics now. It's just, whatever narrative and just plug and play. One of the other things, when we started this podcast, and you wouldn't know, but it didn't start with myself and Chris and with Tamara. It actually started a group of, there was, I think, 11 truckers in Western Canada. They started it, and then Tamara somehow got involved. And then she called me, asked me for a favor to help with messaging. But because it was so complex, there was nothing but deception from legacy media. There was deception from alternative media as well, on all sides. No one was being straight with what was going on. I was doing my best to try to manage that and to leverage one media over the other, to do my best to get the story out, while also trying to bait the legacy media to cover it. Because in the beginning, the legacy media wasn't covering it. They were trying to ignore it, which is one of the reasons I banned them from our press conferences. And I knew that would set them off. What people don't know is not only did I ban them from our press conferences, but I also sent invites to all my contacts in the legacy media. And then when they responded, I said, "Oh, sorry, you can't come." They went crazy.
I think marketers call that the takeaway sale.
But that's right. That's right.
You know, what infuriated me about that, when you look at headlines throughout the world, there was one guy with a Confederate flag who was hounded out of the crowd by the convoy. There was one guy with the swastika flag. I would pay money to have that person revealed and outed, because because I think, and I'm not the only one, that was a plant, because it was just so convenient that there was a photographer there getting professional quality photos of this person walking through the crowd. And yet those two images were on infinite loop all over the world. They just looped the same image over and over. And then it's so subtle. I mean, Noam Chomsky's original book, Manufacturing Consent, talked about all of this. And it's kind of almost disheartening how he became sort of a COVID authoritarian later.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
You know, suddenly the headlines say Confederate flags and swastikas, plural. Like it's plural, and it's so subtle, right? And so it gets into the mind of the masses, and they think that this place was overrun with Hitler Youth and, you know, Klansmen and people. And it was one guy of each, one swastika, one Confederate flag, and they were hounded out of the area by the participants. And so that was infuriating. And the other thing I'll say about this, when I tried to engage with people who disagreed with me about what you were trying to do, what the goal, the stated goal of the convoy was, the discourse would be civil and it would be polite until one thing happened. When I challenged their source of news, when I said, well, you're getting, you know, when I called into question the veracity of the mainstream media, they flipped out. Like the conversation turned nasty immediately. So what I found very odd about this is you can oppose people's premises and you can attack even their beliefs, but if you attack their support structure for how they base their knowledge, they get defensive and they come out swinging.
It's because you've triggered them into cognitive dissonance. And, you know, one of the benefits of all of this, I've managed to connect with some people that have large platforms, people who I admire. One of them was, I've messaged him back and forth just a couple of times, is Scott Adams. And Scott Adams describes this as the 7 signs of cognitive dissonance. He's trying to do his best to get people to understand this. Once you challenge their belief system, they do one of the 7, they jump into one of the 7 categories, which are change the topic, ad hominem, mind reading, word salad, analogy instead of reason. It's too complicated to explain, or the so you're saying straw man, which is what you saw, if you remember, Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman's a good example of that. And that's what you've done. You've managed to force them into second guessing their belief system, because we're no longer a science-based society. We are now a belief-based society, and we don't challenge our own beliefs. That's why I've always grown up listening to people who have different perspectives and opinions that I do. I'm not a huge fan of Noam Chomsky, but I've read and at least had exposure to 90% of his stuff, just so I understand what the other side thinks, right? And sometimes there's crossover, sometimes we agree on stuff. And that's how I think that's the direction we need to go in a society. Like I have a Discord now, and my Discord, we're slowly building it out in a sort of beta testing, if you will, because it started by some people who are kind of lefty, but they're supportive of freedom. We disagree on stuff, but we want to have a place for us all to talk without the vitriol and noise from the political actors who don't want that to happen. So we have a right-wing room, a left-wing room, an I don't know room, so we can, you know, over time just start to hear each other out. That's the way it used to be. And I think we need to go in that direction, in my opinion. And that will solve a lot of it.
Well, what's very ironic now is that a lot of the dissent, the pillars of dissent, like sort of disputing mainstream narratives, framing, that sort of thing, that all, as far as I can remember, originated on the left. Like it was like leftist progressive that were sort of the resistors, the free speech champions, that sort of thing. And now there's this, it's almost an inversion where now it's like, the left is very establishment. And I think that whole left-right dichotomy is sort of obsolete in the sense that now it's more of a tension between centralization and decentralization. I mean, you've probably heard this a million times talking to Bitcoiners, but I just distill it down to, you either think you have a moral right to tell everybody else or other people what to do and how to think, or you don't. And that's the whole differentiation right now. And like you said, the Freedom Convoy was pro-choice. It was basically, I can't decide for you whether you should get the vaccine or not. I can decide for me that's a big enough job. I mean, it's hard enough to make your own decisions and gather your own information in the world. How on earth are you expected to do it for other people? But that's the situation we're in now. And so that straddles left and right.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we're seeing, like if we were to live in this, 17th or 18th century French revolutionary perspective where there's left and right, if that's the case, then I have news for everybody on the left. You're the right-wing authoritarians who wanted to censor my video games and music in the 90s. That's what you've become. Mm-hmm. You become the very people you profess to be fighting against. And that's why I think I don't like dichotomies. And I explain this both with Robert and on Michaela Peterson's podcast, that I think we have at least three perspectives on every topic, but probably a much broader spectrum. And where we have, like I explained, I like the goals of the left, where they want to help people. I like the systems of the right, where they want to organize things so things make logical sense for us to do that. And I love the freedom of libertarianism, that we all get the choice to decide where we want to plot on that graph. And that's going to be my mission moving forward, to try to pull people out of this left-right lazy binary view of the world that our media and politicians like, but unfortunately it's just not accurate.
Right. Have you ever read Martin Gurry's Revolt of the Public?
No.
He came out with this, I want to, he talks about, I'm trying to think if it came out before Trump and Brexit or after, but it was sort of like somewhere in the 20 teens. He was an ex-CIA analyst, but I mean, he's like, it wasn't as glamorous as it sounds, but he talks about basically how our legacy institutions are completely out of touch with, its roots, like the reason they're governing mandates, and out of touch with the people. And he traces it all the way from the Arab Spring and the color revolutions and that kind of thing. And I think, and he actually was recently, he doesn't do a lot of public appearances, but he was just on Trigonometry. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, he was just on their show a couple weeks ago. And it really, he referenced the Freedom Convoy actually on that interview and stuff. And it brings in this atrophy of our institutions, right? Our institutions are industrial aged behemoths that function on a top down, pyramid structure. And we're in this network world. That's what a lot of my reading covers and stuff over the years is like, we're in this network world where everything is distributed, not hierarchical. And so, it sort of corresponds with what we call, the fourth turning. That's another book that's sort of, I don't know if you're familiar with that one, that just we're sort of at this inflection point where the old systems are breaking down. The new systems are coming in to take their place. It's probably as good a place as any to start talking about Bitcoin, which entered the scene during the whole trucker convoy.
Yeah, and that was I got a lot of heat for that.
You and me both.
I didn't realize until recently. I was in a Twitter space, and somebody who is a Bitcoiner, I don't know if I should say who he uses a pseudonym, but he said in this Twitter space that he tried to reach out to Tamara before anybody got to Ottawa, to say that I'm a Bitcoiner. I have a bunch of Bitcoiners. We want to raise money for you. You're raising a lot of money. We know it's going to be frozen, or we believe it's going to be frozen. So it's a decentralized alternative. And her response, according to this Bitcoiner, she was in the truck apparently with Chris or something, and she said, "I don't need video game money. I need real money." Okay, we've all been there, right? We've all heard those sorts of things. And it wasn't until we had been in Ottawa for several days that Caribou found me online, because they were raising money in Bitcoin. They wanted to figure out how they can help us. And then they saw me on one of the interviews and searched me on Twitter and saw that I had hashtag Bitcoin. So they called me and or they messaged me and said, "Wait, are you a Bitcoiner?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a quiet one, but yeah, I've been in learning about Bitcoin since 15, into it since I think 16 is when I first bought it." And he's like, "Oh, okay, can we come meet with you? Like, we're trying to do this." Or I'm like, sure, come. So they came the next day. There was, I don't know, 12, 13 of them showed up in their parkas and ski suits because it was minus 40 degrees. And they didn't know each other. I didn't know this. Caribou was going around and other Bitcoiners saw his Bitcoin hat and they said, "Hey, you're a Bitcoiner." I said, "Yeah, I'm going to meet with BJ. You want to come with me?" Says, "Oh yeah, we want to come." So they all kind of formed some sort of friendship, collaboration. And we all know, there was friction there and people didn't know what to do. And they were trying to figure out how to make it work. They came to me. I gave them, I don't know, the blessing, but to say, yeah, I'm on board. I'll deal with the board or the Freedom Convoy organizers, whatever. You go do the fundraising. We'll take care of each other. Everything will work out. I'm glad you're doing this. This can be an amazing moment for Bitcoin. Let's stick together and make it happen. And then later on that day, I went to the board members. I don't know, went to, but we would communicate through text messaging, or they'd come one at a time and coming into my room or whatever. But I can't remember who I mentioned it to first. There was a couple of them in my room. And I said, "Yeah, get good news. There's a bunch of Bitcoiners that are raising money for the convoy." And it was, "That's criminal money for drugs and stuff." Like, oh, here we go again. And I joke often, I tell people I had to figure out a way to rapid fire orange pill people, and was not having success, but slowly over time, some of them, at least, I don't want to say they warmed up to the issue, but it was like, "Well, we have bigger issues to deal with, so you do whatever you're doing with Bitcoin." I'm like, "Okay, well, that was basically it."
So how many people became instantly orange pilled when bank accounts started getting frozen?
It's amazing. It's just like the narrative poisoning problem with messaging. Once you throw them the counter narrative, either people will slip into the 7 signs of cognitive dissonance, at least based on my experience, or if it's really serious, it really hits them emotionally where it's important, like their freedom and their wealth, then they switch to, "Okay, tell me more," right? So we got a little bit of that. There was so much. I spent a week on the phone with lawyers trying not to get arrested. There were so many other things going on that it's not even covered in the book, stuff I haven't talked about yet because there's so many things. But what it did do is it allowed me to do consecutive Twitter spaces towards the end and then after the convoy and leading up to Bitcoin 2022 in Miami, that I had people, "Okay, tell me about Bitcoin. How did it work during the convoy? How do I buy it? Should I keep it here?" And it just really opened up the doors where people previously, they dismissed it because, look, in the Western world, we're spoiled. We don't deal with regular currency collapses. We're not in Argentina and Brazil, right?
Yeah.
But so what is Bitcoin here? It's an investment. Well, once the Freedom Convoy came around, that hyperbolic scenario that we all thought would never happen here, it's always going to happen somewhere else. Well, it happened here. And now it's more than just an investment for a small group of people that's growing daily. That's why in my Discord, we have a Bitcoin chat for people who are new and still learning and don't understand. And, I like the soft pill approach, the soft orange pill approach of let people come to you, and they are definitely coming because of the chief marketing officer of Bitcoin, Justin Trudeau.
Indeed. I mean, that was a defining moment for Bitcoin. I've been following Bitcoin. I got involved with it in 2013. I was writing then that the Cyprus bail-in was what was pushing Bitcoin above $100 for the first time. Like, people were realizing, hey, wait a minute. You mean the banks can just reach into your account and they can recapitalize a zombie bank with my savings? And then that language suddenly appeared all over the world. Like, it started in Canada. Again, it was the Harper government in those days. It showed up in a budget, this plan to rapidly convert certain assets in the unlikely event of a systemically important bank. And then it got re-upped into the budget, and then it was formalized under Trudeau. So it's now, that's bail-ins are baked in Canada, like just banking.
And if you remember, because I remember that was going on, the narrative around bail-ins is, it's just a precaution, but it'll never actually be put into practice.
Happen.
Just like we're never actually going to freeze your bank accounts, right?
Yeah. And the bail-in language is enshrined in pretty well all the G20 nations now. And in fact, there's even a supranational treaty that covers it. And so at the time I was saying, someday banks are just going to be like this. As the financial system teeters on collapse, governments are going to get desperate and they're going to be like seizing bank accounts and stuff. And then it fast forward a bunch of years, I launched my newsletter in 2021. The Convoy happened in 2021, right? In 21.
22.
So I launched the newsletter in 21, and everything I was talking about as saying, the governments are going to get desperate and you need Bitcoin. It's not an investment. It's like an outside monetary system. There's going to be two monetary systems in the future: CBDCs, which will be like social credit systems, and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And we're going to have this sort of monetary apartheid between the two. And everything I was talking about in that newsletter and the initial report that launched it, I was thinking 5 and 10 year increments, like 5-10 years out, this sort of thing is going to happen. Less than a year later, it started happening. Like, especially with the Trudeau seizing the bank accounts, that was crossing the Rubicon. There is no going back. You are right. I mean, nothing did more to market Bitcoin than that. I tell this story a lot. Sorry if you're listening, you've heard this one. I got a neighbor nearby. Right after that happens, he rolls by in his Tesla, rolls down his window, and he yells, "Mark, I got to get me some Bitcoin." Right. And so and it wasn't about making money on it. It was about preserving his funds. And so, I mean, another person I know, they had a relative lose an acting position because she contributed to the Freedom Convoy, and she got doxxed when that spreadsheet came out, and you're gone. So, I mean, that was such an act of violence, really. Like, just, it was such a violation of human rights to seize bank accounts and to dox the people who were making perfectly legal donations to that. What did you think when the hearing, what was it called? The review, the Emergency Act had to be reviewed.
The POEC.
Yeah. Because if you were paying attention, right, again, we have this framing. So I subscribe to Blacklock's Reporter, which I think is like the only media worth subscribing to and paying money for, blacklocks.ca. I have no connection with them. I don't know them, but they're the best. If you were following the coverage of that through them, you would know that every mainstream media talking point throughout the convoy had been proven false, right? There were no truckers setting fires to apartment buildings. There are no truckers defecating and urinating on the unknown soldier memorial. There was no, the Ottawa police did not beg Trudeau to invoke the Emergencies Act. Like, none of that happened. That was all categorically false. Yet, most of the Canadian public doesn't know any of this because of the way the media has framed it.
Yeah, the Canadian publics are being treated like the public in China, who have no knowledge of Tiananmen Square, the Tiananmen Square massacre. It's exactly the same thing. It's really concerning. The hearing itself was, I tried to put some faith in the justice presiding over it, and very disappointed in what I saw. I saw, a lot of people who had faith in, or at least was holding on to a little bit of hope in the judicial system, just wither away. Because what happened? We went in, and this is where I get smeared by the political class because they don't like that I won't toe a political narrative. And I'm sorry, but I'm, trust but verify. I like truth, even when truth sucks sometimes. And we were going into it with two narratives. One was from the Liberal Party, which was Mad Max, pandemonium and chaos, killings in the street, whatever. And then there was the conservative narrative, which was that it was peaceful and it got out of hand, which is also false. It's the exact opposite. It was chaos the first weekend. We got it under control. We got it organized. And then you had dance parties every night and barbecues and feeding the homeless, right? Because neither anybody in the political class could see the Freedom Convoy's grievances be validated. The Conservative Party in particular couldn't see a Facebook group of 500,000 people who are upset with their own party, their own base, out fundraising any political party in Canadian history. They couldn't allow that to happen. Mm-hmm. And what's the best way to crush it? Well, during the convoy, you get a hold of it and you co-opt it to help end it prematurely. And then in the preliminary hearing, in the POEC, you ensure that one of your narratives dominates. But neither of them were true. And so there's some pain in the ass named Dichter who gets up there, who gets subpoenaed, which they weren't counting on, who told the truth, that it was a beautiful moment in history. Like I haven't gone to too many Grateful Dead concerts when I was younger, but I went to a few of them, went to a bunch of Fish concerts, Allman Brothers. Like that's what I grew up listening to. That sort of friendly vibe where everybody loves each other. Yeah, we're all different. We come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of us couldn't say socioeconomic backgrounds, but we all loved each other. A little too much drugs for my liking, but whatever. You do you, I do me sort of thing. And that's exactly what we had. And it's just amazing to see all these people in our society that look to historical moments like, I don't know, Woodstock, where people came together around loving one another and a spirit of positivity. They had it right in front of their faces. They had it right in front of Parliament Hill. And what did? They targeted and smeared it, and they did everything they could to destroy it to the point where it may affect Canadian jurisprudence for generations in the future because of the outcome in the report. And then there's a political side, by the way, and that's another thing that a lot of people have missed. If you look at the recommendations from the POEC, it is a direct target against CSIS. Now, I'm sure we're much more libertarian than most people, but given the type of corruption we see in our political class, we do at least need, if we're going to have an institution that investigates corruption within politics, they need to be able to function. And the recommendations that were presented in the POEC basically take CSIS and make it completely, ineffectual when it comes to looking at foreign money that's entering the political sphere and causing a lot of damage to this country. So there's so many political pieces going on, and that's just some of them. There's so much more to it that, as being somebody who was on the stand and knowing a lot of the players, having been involved politically in the past, running as a candidate, knowing most of our MPs, it's a shame that we don't have an actual media that would dissect it. There's one more, I'll just mention this. There's an independent media source called Diverge Media. Mm-hmm. And independent guy, I think that's the future. It's not alternative media. It's going to be independent media, the small guys. And he reached out to me, did an interview with me, did a whole bunch of background before our interview, has done interview with other people, and realized that the entire narrative that he's been sold is a lie. And he's been delving deep into it over time, conducting interviews and all that sort of stuff. And he said to me, when last time he spoke a few days ago, he says, you know, what's really frustrating to me, what's really insulting, is everything I've discovered, you could discover in 5 minutes if you just looked at it, right?
Yeah.
And he says, I look at legacy media, like, you know, we have this journalist, Glenn McGregor, the guy who was stalking me in front of my hotel room. All Glenn McGregor needed to do was look at point A, B, and C, listed them off. He's going to be doing something about it in the near future. And he would see right in front of his face that this is a lie, but he doesn't do it.
Was he the
None of them do
CTV
it.
news guy?
Yeah, he's a CTV guy.
He reached out to me too.
Oh, yeah.
I'll make it quick. So I run a company. My main business, I run a web hosting domain registrar company called Easy
Yep.
DNS. Been doing it since '98. We were the first registrar to take Bitcoin as a payment method since 2013.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've been orange pilling my customers ever since. and I was against vaccine mandates. I'm vaccinated, but I'm against vaccine mandates, right?
Yep.
I haven't taken any boosters though, and I won't. But this happened. You did your thing, you took action, and we put out a post and we said, until they succeed, we are going to donate all Bitcoin payments to the trucker convoy.
Oh,
and that's how I met Greg Foss, actually, through that. And
cool.
Of course, yeah,
he's a good dude. I love him.
What a shitstorm that caused, right? So I've said things over the years. I've caused the occasional, I'm known for being against cancel culture. I'm known for being opposed to deplatforming. I actually wrote a book about it. So people, my customers aren't like, usually they're not that surprised when I come out and say something like bombastic. You know, I mean, my blog is called bombthrower.com. This is Bomb Thrower TV. It's just Mark being a bomb thrower. This was something else. So we had didn't succeed, but we had people initiate a campaign to have us decertified as a CIRA registrar. Like they said, you know, you should strip them of their certification. And we lost a lot of customers over it. We gained a few customers over it as well. When the Emergency Act was invoked, we got a legal opinion, and she was like, Mark, you could be captured by this. Like Easy DNS could be captured by this, like within this regulatory legislation, because you've publicly said this. And it was like, for a while, I just felt like I was like persecuted. Like it was like, okay, we're on the run here. I don't know if my bank accounts are going to get seized. I don't know what's going to happen. We actually hadn't managed to, Easy was just pooling it in our one wallet, and then the Emergency Act happened before we had sent any over. So the lawyer said, don't send any over, just keep it where it is. So then we said, okay, look, we'll fund things like the Canadian Constitutional Foundation and the JCCF, and we'll put the funds toward that until we have some regulatory clarity. But man, it was crazy. And I actually remember I spiked a deal. I was about to invest in a company, and I said, I can't do it because I don't know if my bank accounts are about to be seized, and if all the world I have left is just my crypto. Like that might be all I have left to like make payroll and fight this in court and do that. It might, I wake up tomorrow and my bank accounts are seized. So it was quite harrowing, you know?
Yeah, I can only imagine. You know, you have enough aggravation to deal with running a business.
Yeah.
I can only imagine, you know, add that layer. And I complained about my business where I just had a few employees and dealing with university students all day long. I didn't have to deal with my government breathing down my neck, right? In a way that it's never done before. But yeah, everything that you went through times I don't know, 1,000, and every day. That's what it was. I don't know. It was a crazy time.
Plus, we never actually had our accounts seized, but many Canadians did. And many people are still like, I see tweets and accounts from people who say, yeah, my account got frozen. It took this long to get unfrozen. I still can't get credit. I still can't get banked. I still can't do this. So, I mean, we got off easy, I will say that. But I mean, it really was in Canada, unprecedented. I never would have dreamt of such a thing happening in Canada.
Well, let me ask you something. Having gone through that, do you regret it?
It's funny. I I don't I was having lunch with the CEO of Sierra about a year later, and I
Okay.
said I'm keeping my mouth shut from now on because I just don't need the aggravation. And he said, that's really sad. He says, everyone in Ottawa, everyone in the office probably disagreed with you, but we need people like you out there, like saying this. So what I have done, um, I have I'm still vocal over on my personal blog, bombthrower.com, bombthrower TV. Here we are, we're doing this interview. Um, I stopped writing the weekly newsletter over on Axis of Easy. Over on Easy, we have somebody else writing it now. I send ideas, I
Mhm.
write the occasional thing, but I said, I'm going to just be who I am over here. I have my own audience and I'm just going to run, easy DNS. We're just going to run the business. And when there's something that is topical, we came out under easy DNS. We commented and put out a piece about Bill C-26 and,
Yeah.
the cyber security bill. I sit on the board for the Internet Society Canada chapter, and we do a lot of policy work. So I'm still active, but I guess I sort of try to confine my bombastic ranting to the bomb thrower channel, and I just sort of let easy DNS go. And maybe that's me being gutless, possibly. I don't know.
I don't think it's being gutless, but I mean, it's disappointing. I mean, this is the side effect is the self-censorship, and
Mm-hmm.
that's that's the worst form of censorship in my mind. And we've all been subjected to it, myself as well.
Yeah.
We have this $450 million class action suit
Yeah.
that I have to figure out a way to fundraise around it for myself and everybody else who doesn't have any representation, because the few people who have representation have hoarded as many donations as possible, kept it for themselves, and abandoned the rest of us.
Hmm.
So much for unity. And then it's,
Yeah.
oh, let's unify. God.
Is there
This
like
is
a
the problem.
crowdfund? Is there like a crowdfund fundraiser for your defense on this, or is there one?
Uh, I'm actually getting my council to accept donations directly, so we don't deal with the crowdfunding issues.
Yeah, true.
So to go directly to his trust or escrow or whatever. And I've been spending the past 6 months of reaching out to people who don't have representation to put something together for us. So we don't, because what's going to happen is whoever doesn't have representation in the class action suit, everybody else is going to blame them. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't want anybody to be kind of left hanging, especially people who don't know what they've gotten involved in. There's a lot of people who don't understand, and I'm no lawyer, but I've grown up around lawyers. I understand. I'm a little bit comfortable in this space. I produce a podcast for lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
so I have a better than average understanding of the process, but still quite lacking. But some of these people have not even the slightest clue of how this all works. And I'm going to go and defend myself. Like, you're not going to do that
Yeah.
because that doesn't work. So I've been spending a lot of my time on that. But yeah, we have something set up with my council, and it's just a matter of, we haven't announced it yet because there's some other issues around it, which I should probably tell you off the record.
Okay.
That will have some other effects on some other people, but that's another issue.
All right. Well, after the show or something. But when you want, we can put links to it in the show notes. If it's not ready yet, we can hold it back for now. But
Okay.
put that in.
Okay.
Um, you know, I've heard it said many times that the Freedom Convoy was the beginning. It was the beginning of the tide turning on COVID tyranny throughout the world. What do you think?
Yeah, it was very funny during the protest. I remember it started on the provincial level, and for those of you, your listeners and viewers who are in the United States, that's our equivalent of states, and a premier is the equivalent of our governors. So we saw the premiers. You have to know how politics works. They'll test messaging. That's why sometimes you see politicians say one thing one day and the complete opposite the next day, and then revert back. They're testing messaging. And I saw them testing messaging into the first week, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, from a number of premiers, including the Ontario premier, who is just as bad as Trudeau, just as bad. So this is not a left and right thing. They're all bad.
Yeah, because he was from the
And
Conservative Party and Trudeau was Liberal, just to spell it out for the Americans.
that's right. So
yeah.
the Premier of Ontario is Conservative.
Yeah.
He sought an injunction on the Give, Send, Go money. Trudeau went after our bank accounts. They're both culpable. They're both working together. So we can get beyond this fantasy that there's two different parties. It's the Uni Party. I'm sorry. People get upset with me when I say that, but truth sucks sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And so we saw them testing messaging. And I remember saying to some people, some of the other road captains, people in the organizing it, saying, this is good. They're testing messaging. That means they have data showing that there's overwhelming support for us. They don't know what to do. Just wait. Let's wait it out a couple of days. And then lo and behold, we started to see provinces. What's his name? Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, I believe, did the same.
Yeah.
They started testing messaging and saying, oh, well, maybe we're going to roll back. Maybe it's time to end the pandemic and restrictions. And I was, laughing, hashtag nothing to do with truckers, right?
Yeah.
Because they'll never admit it. But that's all it did. And I found out from a number of people, there was 30 plus convoys around the world that people realized in various jurisdictions that this tactic was working. And this also had the same ripple effect in jurisdictions outside of Canada. So yeah, I think it did. The only one that held on were, the Trudeau administration. And as I explained, because extremists only know one worldview and they'll always double down on their strategy. They'll never sit back and think, what's the other guy thinking, right?
And
they did the same thing.
There's
zero introspection.
Can we
zero
possibly
observing
be
ego
wrong on this? Yeah.
That's right. And they eventually, how many months later was it? 8 months later, they eventually removed the restrictions within Canada and the mandates. And once again, hashtag nothing to do with truckers. Just because you think you can hang on for additional 6 months, you think we don't know it was the convoy. We know it did. And the reason, I've been very vocal in my criticism of all aspects of the political class, the people who got involved and co-opted the convoy. Like, it's very convoluted and confusing. Diverge Media is doing a lot of work on this and we'll be releasing some of it. But part of the reason I was so frustrated and so angry about it is because look what happened in the Netherlands. Jordan Peterson explained to me on one of our calls, he said, the people in the Netherlands who I eventually connected with, they looked at what happened in the convoy. They tried to look at the weaknesses that were exposed by the government, and they tried to hedge against that. They had regular protests. They would break it up. They'd start again. Always kept the government guessing. And what was the eventual result of that? The fact that they protected against all the things that we dealt with. They actually formed a party, and they got 20% of the vote. And now they have the political capital and the votes in their parliament to block any of this nonsense, whether it's WEF or neo-progressive, whatever you want to call it, to block any of these restrictions on farmers because they have 20% of the parliament. So they won, right?
Yeah.
That's what we were robbed of. We were robbed of building an equivalent grassroots movement that wasn't tied to any political party that we could have maneuvered and found candidates, politicians, groups of people, advocacy groups to align with, to have that sort of effect on Canadian politics. We were robbed of that. And that I will never forgive them for.
That brings us back to Martin Gurry's book, who said that was the fatal flaw in a lot of these populist movements, was that they didn't have a coherent strategy for what to do with the momentum and the inertia and the victories that they achieved. Like, they could overthrow a government, but then, just someone worse would take its place. And so there was no coherent methodology to sort of channel it all into. And what you were describing about the Dutch and Netherlands, they transcended that. They figured it out and they did it. All I'll say, though, is it's early days here in Canada. I mean, maybe that particular chapter went the way it did, but you guys did something immutable, something transformative, really. you set off the whole movement, and that set the entire thing in motion. So I wouldn't sell yourself short there, because it all started in Canada with you guys.
Yeah, and I think we're right now at the stage where people are, independent journalists, YouTubers are now talking to myself and other people, understanding the nuance of what went on behind the scenes, and they're now understanding that there's two convoys. There was what I call political convoy and freedom convoy, and freedom convoy was much larger. Political convoy was a small group of people trying to co-opt us for the political class, which is going to happen everywhere, whatever. So we're going to have some rough waters for a little while as we kind of purge out political convoy, and political convoy can go back to their parties, and the rest of us can refocus on unifying and building something with people we don't necessarily agree with everything, but we agree on respect and unity and tolerating each other. And this is what I love about the Bitcoin community. And I hate the word community, but it's so awesome. And it's so many people in politics don't have this advantage. The people, the diehard political people, to go into a space where there's a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different views on the world and how the world should operate, but they agree on one thing, which is freedom, sovereignty of money, decentralization. And it's become this undercurrent that allows us all to talk to each other. And I've only ever experienced that in Bitcoin. So those are the societal benefits and political benefits, if you will, of Bitcoin on top of the monetary value that it has. And I'm trying my best to make more and more people realize that and see that. And some of them have.
I think you've done, a monumental amount of work in that regard. And I know you took a few hits to the body to do it. And so the rest of us.
And my ankle.
Yeah. Yeah, that too. And the rest of us are in your debt for that. So we thank you for it. So you've been great with your time. Why don't you give us a rundown of how to follow your stuff, contribute where we can, buy the book, and keep in touch with what you're doing.
Okay, so the easiest way, I've set a domain with my name, which is so embarrassing. Never something I never thought I would do, but it is what it is. So if you go to benjaminjdichter.com, that'll send you to the link tree that has all my stuff, my Substack. I just released a Substack today on Tarek Fatah. The where to buy the book, the various places where you can get it, all my social media. I started doing, live streams with some of my followers, slowly building it up over time, because again, this issue hasn't died down, and I want to try to orange pill as many people as possible are still concerned. So just go to benjaminjdichter.com. You'll see all the links there, and that will always be updated with new stuff. In terms of contributions, I'll get back to you and I'll let you know when we figure out. Right now, it's just going to my counsel, Jim Carhalios, and we'll set something up, but he can take donations. Also, by the way, in Bitcoin, because I made him a Bitcoiner a couple of years ago.
Cool.
And still new, doesn't really know it. He's like, he understands in principle why it's important.
Yeah.
He holds a little bit. And I said, here's your opportunity. So actually, Caribou is trying to help him on board to accept Bitcoin donations. I don't know if he's going to set up a BitPay or something like that, but he's going to walk him through it. So again, we're all coming together to help each other, which was the spirit of the Freedom Convoy.
Great. Okay. Are you going to Miami next month?
I am going to be in Miami. I look very forward to it. So I wasn't going to go. And then Breedlove's like, you got to come hang out. And I'm like, all right, I'll come. So,
well, I'm going to see you there. So I'm going to. So
awesome.
It'll be great to meet you in person. And thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. Anytime.